Today's topic is on the measurement of innovation and methods of innovation. And the two questions that I want to ask for discussion are, how do you measure innovation? And the second is, what is your preferred method of innovation? I don't want to go too late tonight, so just give me very short answers. What are your thoughts about these things? Again, because it's just for discussion, you can think about the questions more later. But let's start with Rita. Number one, very quickly, how do you measure innovation in your mind? What is your preferred method of innovation?
How the function is work well with people.
Say it again.
How it will function.
How to measure innovation?
Yes.
Okay, what's your preferred method of innovation? When you say, oh, I have to innovate, what do you do? Do you do anything special? Do you sit down? Do you go for a walk? Do you write it down? What do you do to innovate? Nothing
walking
special?
around.
Walking around? Okay.
I think.
Thank you. Marius, how do you measure innovation? Like, let's say a friend of yours goes and says, I did something innovative. How do you evaluate that? Oh, that's not innovative. And then what's your preferred method of innovation?
Yeah, I don't have a specific one, but I think there are many KPIs, but it depends on, like, they can differ. It could be various things.
Sure. And what's your method of innovation?
I think, like we said in last lecture, a good method is like taking two things and trying to find something that combines both, and then you've got an innovation.
Okay, good. Thank you. Putri, what do you think? How do you measure innovation? Somebody comes to you something innovative. How do you judge that to be innovative? And what is your preferred method of innovation?
Maybe how the idea is new to the world and how they can functional for every person who need the new idea. I guess that's how I measure the innovation.
But how are you supposed to know if it's new in the world?
If it's something new for me, like something uncommon,
okay,
or something just new.
Okay, good. And what is your preferred method of innovation?
Maybe like compare things, like how the old the past idea and the new idea and compare it.
Okay. Let me give you an example from my experience. So when I was at Samsung, we used to have sometimes a task force for a particular problem or a product or something, project. And sometimes the task force, the mission of the task force, so it would be me, some other staff members, scientists, administrators, marketing people, we'd get this task force. And sometimes the task force was, we need a new kind of touch screen. And we need to innovate a new touch screen. So that was the mission of the task force. So almost always at Samsung, they would start by benchmarking. Does everyone know what benchmarking is? They would look at other companies and gather the information, make a benchmark, and they would start the innovation project by benchmarking. And I was always a little bit strange TF task force member, because I'm an employee and we had the orders to innovate, and usually the task force leader would say, let's go out and benchmark. And I would say, I'm sorry, I am not going to do that. It's like me telling you, here's a question, Putri, how do you measure innovation? And Putri tells me, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to answer another question. Can you imagine that? If I ask Marius, what is your preferred method of innovation? He says, I'm not going to answer your question, Professor. I want to talk about football. Who's the best team in the Bundesliga? That's what I want to answer, right? So I would say, I'm not going to benchmark. Now, I'm not just being obnoxious or a bad employee. The reason I wouldn't benchmark is, as soon as you benchmark, you set yourself up in a box, right? They often talk about innovation as thinking outside the box. And if you set up the box, it reduces the chance that you think outside the box. So instead, what I told the team is, you go do your benchmarking. I'm going to think about the idea, go for a walk, and try to imagine in my own ignorance, even though I have a lot of education, but I'm not, specialist in touchscreens, think about ways to do a new type of touchscreen. And then after that, do benchmarking. That's what I told them. So that was one of my methods. So it's interesting because one of the methods of innovation, which I'm not going to present in the lecture, is benchmarking. And I actually disagree with that. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, there's no right answer. I'm just sharing with you my experience. Gunawan, thanks for signing in. How do you measure innovation? What is your preferred method of innovation?
I think we can measure innovation through the patents, or like Ika said before, like comparing it to our innovation to another thing in the world. Like if it doesn't exist before, then maybe it's innovation. And then if for the method of innovation, I think brainstorm or like creative thinking, yeah.
Okay, good answers. In fact, the concept of patents, that's a very common way to measure innovation. It gets a little complicated because pure number of patents may not reflect it. There may be patents in old areas, so maybe it's not so innovative. But patents also are with very practical applications. So in some ways, future innovation, very futuristic things. So that's a good answer, but it's still very complicated. I was actually a consultant at Booz Allen Hamilton. Remember I talked about Booz Allen Hamilton, it's a consultancy. And I developed an innovation measurement model based indeed on patents, and weighted the patents in terms of their growth levels, of categories of patents, and so forth. Okay, thank you. So Nam Mei Huang, how do you measure innovation?
Yes, for me, I think like innovation is how it's practical in the real life. And for me, the best way to the method of innovation is write it down, because if you don't write it down, you're gonna forget about the idea.
You like to write it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. Well, I'm not saying there's right answer, but the methods of innovation that I will describe, like brainstorming, mind mapping, concept mapping, they almost always involve some form of writing, either on the paper or the board, and so forth. Writing is a very powerful way to innovate. And you put it down, it's a kind of metaphor for innovation, because just sitting there and being creative, you can always be creative. It's like dreaming, right? But then when you write it down, it is mimicking this concept of innovation. Is not just a new idea, but making it real. And by writing it down, in some ways, you are making it more real, more tangible. So that's a very important part of innovation. Thank you. Yata Yokudu, what's your thoughts?
How I can be able to measure innovation is the creativity and the uniqueness involved in it.
Okay. And how do you measure that creativity and uniqueness? How do you put a number to that?
It depends on the longevity of it, the duration of it, how long it can last.
Oh, that's good. That impact.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, what is your preferred method of innovation?
Sketching.
Sketching?
I mean sketching.
Oh, sketching, right. Okay, great. Mao Wensheng, what are your answers?
I think should depend on the input matrix and the output matrix. To measure the innovation. The input matrix is like the time and the money and the investment funds you put in the innovation, and the output matrix is like the profit you can get from the innovation.
Oh, that's very interesting. So what Mao is talking about is not really measuring the innovation, because that's kind of hard, but the aspects around the innovation. In other words, what goes into the innovation and what comes out of the innovation. Because that's a very interesting point, because we were talking so many times that the companies, countries, history, people succeed very much because they innovate. And in fact, that's the central concept of evolution and biology. The species, the animals and the plants that survive are those that over time innovate and adapt to the environment. So this concept of measuring these outputs is very important. Thank you very much. Bae So-hyun, what are your thoughts?
For me, I think first think about new ideas.
Okay.
And for method of innovation, brainstorm and write down.
Okay, very good. Sheng Jiju Shen.
Yes, I'm here, Professor.
How do you measure innovation? What is your preferred method?
And I think the thing that's new to me is innovation. Like iPhone has a function, but other phones don't have it. So I think it's innovation. I think unintentional innovation is my favorite. Like a medicine, penicillin, you know.
Say it again. Painting.
Penicillin.
Oh, penicillin. So unexpected innovation. Yeah.
Yeah, like some singers, when they sleeping, they dream about the song, and when they get up, they write down and see it. So I think it's my favorite.
Very interesting, because innovation is fascinating, because actually the measurement of innovation, which should be so simple, the measurement of innovation, which should be so simple, is very complex, if not impossible. Imagine physics if you couldn't actually measure the length of something, if you couldn't measure time. We talk about Newton and Galileo. They actually were able to measure things, and that enabled physics. So we can't, really measure. And so that's really interesting. And then what is your preferred method of innovation? as Sheng implied, sometimes innovation is unexpected. In other words, if you plan on it and you try to systematically innovate, in a way you cannot. So almost by definition, it's impossible to really have a method of innovation. So this discussion is very good because we don't really have answers to these questions, and today's lecture is about this. So the lecture is going to talk about many different methods because we don't really have one method. And the lecture is going to talk about many different measurements because we don't really have a measurement. Now, you're young in the beginning of your careers, and if you're interested in this area of innovation, maybe somebody will be like an Isaac Newton of innovation and actually measure these things and create a method, like a science. But as Sheng Zhizu implied, a lot of innovation is unexpected. And that makes, it's like physics, the planets going around the sun and so forth. It's not unexpected. They go in regular orbits, so we can do physics and laws. But there's something very strange about innovation in that regard. Okay, two more people. Ahmed Tan.
For me, it's like if it's first, I will brainstorm the creativity of the company or the people. Yes. Then, if it's new for me, it's gonna be the quite innovative thing.
Okay. Very good. Lastly, Inzu Aitshanova. How do you innovate? Well, how do you measure innovation, and what's your preferred method?
I think it should be firstly like the unique one, and it should be like beneficial also. And the preferred method of innovation, I think, like gather impressions. So, and that very like great idea for innovation will be asked in the head.
So kind of
thing.
Okay. Sorry? So actually, Inzu Aitsanova's mentioned something very interesting about measuring the newness and the benefit. Now, this is controversial because ultimately, of course, we want innovation to have benefit. But what does that mean? For example, some of the most innovative times and some of the biggest innovations have come during the times of war and conflict. So is that a benefit? You know, the Wright brothers developed the airplane, but in World War I, those airplanes rapidly developed, and there was a lot of innovation around air flight, so that the airplanes in 1918 were completely different than 1914. And of course, we have the nuclear weapons and so forth. So if you notice, when I defined innovation, I didn't talk about benefit. I mentioned impact. Of course, we do want to have a benefit, and I'm not saying that weapons are ideal form of innovation, but in a way, impact is a broader, more accurate term. The same is true of evolution. This is why I'm very careful about this point. If a species has a mutation, is that a good thing or a bad thing? All of you have different DNA. Is one of your DNA better than another person's DNA? What does that mean? Maybe one of you has a mutation that in one environment is bad, and another environment is good. So for example, there's a mutation in hemoglobin that's very common in Africans and some Middle Eastern called sickle cell. And that mutation causes blood disease. I'm simplifying. But people with sickle cell are immune to malaria. They don't have to take chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine. They don't die of malaria. So that mutation which actually causes some blood disease that can be difficult, has a benefit in an environment where there's lots of malaria. So one mutation or one innovation being better than another one is a little bit difficult concept. It doesn't apply to evolution, and it may not even apply to innovation. But impact certainly is very important. Any other questions before we go to the lecture? No?